Hello, welcome back to my channel. In today's video, I am going to be giving you recommendations on books you should read if you love Colleen Hoover, or even if you don't love Colleen Hoover. I recently thought about this idea because I know that Colleen Hoover is one of those authors that really sucks you in with her writing. I understand why a lot of people start out reading Colleen Hoover and then they kind of discover their reading taste from there, whether it's, going down the more romantic path or the more like hard-hitting literary path or the mystery thriller path. I think people kind of start developing their taste in books based on like Colleen Hoover books. I think that is totally normal, especially since she is such a popular author right now. And I thought it might be fun to identify some of the things in Colleen Hoover's books that really appeal to a lot of people, or things that I guess just seem to be defining of her works, and try to give you some recommendations based off of those things. The majority of the recommendations will be romances, but I do have some like slightly more literary stuff in here and definitely some mystery thrillers as well. So kind of no matter what I think you are looking for after having read some Colleen Hoover stuff, I think you will find some recommendations here. And if you've read some Colleen Hoover and haven't loved her stuff, but maybe you are looking for something that has like similar goals, if that makes sense, I think you can find some good recommendations here as well. So I am going to kind of break these recommendations down kind of based on specific Colleen Hoover books, but also just based on the themes that I've identified in her works. So I'm not going to ramble anymore. Let me tell you about these books. I have quite a few recommendations, 2 or 3 based on each category. I'm going to try to sell you on why you should be reading these books next after giving Colleen Hoover a go. So the first kind of category that I've identified with Colleen Hoover obviously is tough topics. Colleen Hoover really likes to tackle hard-hitting issues and things that are not pretty, I guess, in life. Books that instantly come to mind for me of Colleen Hoover's that really do this are It Ends With Us, Reminders of Him, and All Your Perfects. We've got tough issues like domestic abuse or infertility, things like that. And I think these books can be really comforting to people going through these same things, or draw awareness to things that maybe people haven't really given much thought. So I have 3 different recommendations that kind of run the gamut in terms of, I guess, like targeted age demographic and just like hard-hitting topics. I'll let you know what these topics are going into the book because I think that's important, but also check trigger warnings just in case. So the first book I would recommend is Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez. This was one of my favorite books that I read in 2022. It is a really heartfelt, emotional story that has a really delightful romance at its center. This book is about Alexis and Daniel, though I would say in greater part it is about Alexis. At the beginning of the story, I think she's in her late 30s and she is coming out of a pretty bad relationship that she didn't really know was bad. After some therapy, she realizes that her marriage was emotionally abusive, and you kind of get to see how Alexis was treated and also how someone could get into the situation that Alexis was in. It definitely was a book that took me by surprise with the nuance and the subtlety that it took, showing this emotionally abusive relationship. And the story was not just about Alexis getting out of this bad marriage. That kind of happens off page, but we do get to see Alexis deal with other emotionally abusive relationships in her life while also falling in love with Daniel. It's sort of a like fish out of water, opposites attract kind of romance. Daniel is a few years younger than her, and it's really nice seeing how these two complement each other really well and how they can kind of like boost each other out of places of insecurity. I absolutely love the story. I have not had much luck with Abby Jimenez in the past, but I really, really loved this book. And I think if you like Colleen Hoover, this is a really great book to pick up. It did make me cry, and I'm not much of a crier, so I think if you haven't given this one a go, you should definitely pick it up. Again, trigger warning for emotional abuse and some other hard-hitting topics. Again, check the trigger warnings for those. Another hard-hitting book is Before I Let Go by Kennedy Ryan. I actually think I have it right here. I should have pulled it for this video, but this book is another hard-hitting one. This one's about Josiah and Yasmin. At the start of the book, we find out that these two are divorced for kind of unknown reasons. We know that they went through something really challenging together and maybe weren't the best at communicating their feelings about this particular life event. And we get to see these two slowly come back together over time and work through some of their emotional trauma. I think if you were someone who's experienced miscarriage or stillbirth, this might not be the best book to pick up unless you are looking for something that feels cathartic in that way, because that is something that is at the heart of this book. But it is so well written. I think Kennedy Ryan has such an ability to pull topics that are really challenging and make you sympathize with the characters, feel like it is you that is going through that particular thing, and you know that with Kennedy Ryan, every book is going to feel very triumphant at the end. She is really great with her happily ever afters. So again, I think if you were someone who liked All Your Perfects and that was something that was relatable to you, I think maybe Before I Let Go could be another book that you would really enjoy and introduce you to a new author. A third pick, and one that I would definitely target towards a potentially younger age demographic, would be Dear Ava by Elsa Madden Mills. This is a book that I read read 2 or 3 years ago at this point. I think I actually read it back in 2020. It follows our two main characters, Knox and Ava. This story is a pretty hard-hitting one as well, but it is set in more of like a new adult age demographic there in high school. At the start of the story, though, I do believe it carries into college, and Ava at the beginning of the story is unfortunately sexually assaulted, and this book follows her journey of healing from that and also her journey to try to find the perpetrator because she doesn't know who actually committed this crime against her. And Knox helps her not only, again, with her healing and being there romantically for her, but also helps her try to, again, find the perpetrator of this crime. I loved this book. It was very swoony and emotional, and I just really, really liked this book. For some reason, I feel like if you liked Reminders of Him, you would like this book. It's not that they are, you know, exactly the same in terms of theme or in terms of like the age demographic that they're necessarily targeting, but something about the way that the characters kind of handle the tough things in their life, I don't know, it just kind of reminds me of each other, and I just think that, again, this is a new author for you to try, and I really liked this book. So I think, again, if you are someone who likes tough topics, any of these 3 books would be a great place to start. Now, the next aspect of Colleen Hoover's books that I'm going to be touching on is her magnetic, insta-love, unexplainable chemistry romances. I think a lot of Colleen Hoover's books do have a romantic element that a lot of people tend to really enjoy, and I feel like a lot of her romances, again, really have this sort of like unexplained chemistry aspect to them. You don't have a lot of like childhood friends to lovers situations going on. You don't even have really a lot of enemies to lovers situations going on with Colleen Hoover. It is, you know, sort of an instant attraction that a usually woman has for a man. He has that instant magnetism towards her, and they kind of go on usually some like semi-toxic relationship rides together, but you're always pulled in, you are always sucked in to this adventure. And I feel like I've identified some romances that sort of have that same vibe if you like that aspect of Colleen Hoover's books. The books that I'm thinking of Colleen Hoover's that I think do this or are most exemplary of this would be November 9, Heartbones, and Maybe Someday. And I picked 2 romances that I think kind of fit in this category. First up would be The Devil in the Deep Blue Sea by Elizabeth O'Rourke. Really loved this book, and I think this would be good also if you like an enemies to lovers story, since I don't feel like very many of Colleen Hoover's books do that. This book is about our 2 main characters, Drew and Josh. Drew is a celebrity. I believe she is a singer, and she ends up on a vacation with her boyfriend's family when her boyfriend is not there. So she ends up getting closer to her boyfriend slash ex-boyfriend's brother, Josh, who is a doctor, and he's very stoic and a little bit grumpy, but there is that instant chemistry, that instant banter, and it is so fun to read. I also love that this book isn't overly long. I don't know why that's something that I'm always tempted to point out when I'm talking about Elizabeth O'Rourke stories, but it is something that's really remarkable to me. A lot of her romances are under 300 pages, and yet she convinces me that these 2 should be together. So I really recommend that one, again, if you like that sort of instant chemistry sort of thing that isn't totally insta-love. And then my other recommendation is one that's, again, for like maybe a slightly older age demographic. I mean, like, you can read these at any age. I'm just saying, like, the characters in the books are older or younger. That's what I'm trying to point out when I say age demographic. Book I'm thinking of is 7 Days in June by T.L. Williams. This book I read a couple of years ago and head over heels for. It wasn't totally on my radar because when I looked at the cover, I was like, is this a romance? Is it literary fiction? Like, what is this? And I think it's kind of a bit of both, but it is so romantic. It is a second chance romance. These 2 characters met in high school, spent 1 week together, fell deeply in love, and then a series of unfortunate circumstances pull these characters apart until they meet again much later when they are at a writer's conference together. Our heroine writes a series of, I want to say, like, vampire novels, and he writes more of the literary side of things. She's trying to get into the literary side of things, and so they sort of connect over that and connect over that 1 week that they spent together. The chemistry between these 2 characters is so palpable. I wanted to see them get together, and again, it was kind of reminiscent of Colleen Hoover in that sense. Full transparency, Colleen Hoover is not like my favorite romance author or anything, but I really think that if you like Colleen Hoover, there's a pretty big chance that you would like 7 Days in June. Loved it. So good. And I think it is like a pretty natural next step if you like Colleen Hoover's, again, like magnetic, semi-insta-love romances. All right, the next category that I have come up with kind of coincides, I would say, with the last category in that it is like a very romance-specific thing, and that would be the grumpy slash alpha E heroes that Colleen Hoover puts in her books. I feel like when I'm thinking of Colleen Hoover heroes, I'm thinking of guys who, again, are a little bit grumpy, maybe have some like unexplained trauma that we learn about at the very end of a book. They tend to not be very verbose, shall we say. To her credit, I do think Colleen Hoover has a variety of heroes, but when I think Colleen Hoover heroes, I think of like Ugly Love and Hopeless, these guys who are maybe like not very talkative, but definitely like draw you in. So I have 3 recommendations here. First up, we have All Roads Lead Here by Mariana Zapata. I think this is a very natural recommendation, and I do think that a lot of people who like Colleen Hoover also like Mariana Zapata. This book follows our 2 main characters, Aurora and Rhodes. Aurora has moved back to Colorado, I believe, to go on some hikes that her deceased mother used to go on to kind of like reconnect with her mom in that way, and also just like find out what she wants out of life after a bad breakup. And she meets Rhodes, who I believe is like a park ranger or something like that, and she is renting a garage apartment from him, and they have this like very delicious slow burn relationship. And Rhodes is really grumpy, but for reasons that are explained as the book kind of goes on. And I just really like this book. Again, I think like the writing is pretty accessible when it comes to both authors, and I think if you like the sense of humor in Colleen Hoover's books, I think you would maybe appreciate the sense of humor in Mariana Zapata's books as well. I also think in contrast to, again, some of Colleen Hoover's like magnetic semi-insta love stories, you might like All Roads Lead Here or any of Mariana Zapata's stuff because it's a very slow burn. So if that's something that you didn't like about Colleen Hoover's books, I think this might be the answer to all of your prayers. Next up, we have The Air He Breathes by Brittany C. Cherry. This is a book that I feel like I don't talk about very often, but it is one that I really, really enjoyed. And this one feels like one of the most fitting recommendations on this list. All of the books on this list definitely have something in common with Colleen Hoover's books, but some of them feel like very one-to-one matches. So it's like, if you like Colleen Hoover, pick this book up. The Air He Breathes by Brittany C. Cherry is definitely that way. This book is about our two main characters, Tristan and Liz. Tristan is very emotionally damaged at the beginning of the story and is really rude to his new neighbor Liz, who is moving in, I believe, with her daughter. Maybe he has the daughter. No, I'm pretty sure it's her. And both our hero and heroine are dealing with loss in their life. Again, like trigger warnings, look them up. But this one, we have Tristan and Liz who are dealing with some loss and some grief in their life, and they kind of turn to each other in unhealthy ways, which feels very Colleen Hoover-y. I feel like there's like a toxic element to a fair amount of her stories, and I think like your interpretation of the toxicity is, you know, up to you for sure. But I think The Air He Breathes is really cool because you get to see these two characters kind of use each other and then evolve their relationship. And I think that's something that Colleen Hoover does really well too. She brings in these moral questions or gets you to wonder why these two characters would be interacting, and then she kind of proves to you why they should be together, why they should, you know, keep interacting. And I think The Air He Breathes, again, is like such a good representation of that. I love the story. It feels a little bit gritty, a little bit dark, but very triumphant at the end as well. I will say Brittany C. Cherry's endings tend to be a little over the top, so do Colleen Hoover. So again, I think it's like a great recommendation if you really like Colleen Hoover. And then my last recommendation under the kind of like grumpy semi-alpha heroes category, you know, comparison for Colleen Hoover would be A Photo Finish by Elsie Silver. I loved the story, and I think this one is definitely a really romantic recommendation. If you like Colleen Hoover, I think this is definitely a lot heavier on the romance side of things, but I personally appreciated that. You have a hero who has some trauma in his life that he is unwilling to share at the beginning of the story. You have a heroine who is recently injured and needs to move in with him because she can't live in her like loft apartment at the moment. It's such a swoony romance. It's kind of hard to explain exactly why. This book reminds me of a Colleen Hoover book without spoiling anything, but there is a, I guess you could say, a twist in there that makes you just fall even deeper for the characters and their romantic relationship. And another thing I really love about this book is that it has a very well-defined sense of place. I think that's something that Colleen Hoover does really well in her books. No matter where she sets them, you really feel like you are in that place, whether it's a small town in Texas or a small town in Michigan. The books by Elsie Silver are set in small towns in Canada, and you really feel like you're there. And that's something, again, that I think that this book has in common with some of Colleen Hoover's. So let's move on to the next category, which would be complex morality. I didn't really know how to label this particular category, but I think this is really what defines Colleen Hoover's works to me. In almost every book that she has, there are complex moral questions. Like in Reminders of Him, you have a heroine who has done some bad things, but does that mean she's not deserving of a second chance? And I think those are themes that continue to repeat themselves throughout Colleen's books. So for this category, I selected two books to like kind of compare to, though I would say almost all of Colleen Hoover's books fit in this category. I picked Regretting You and Slammed. I think also in this category, you can have questions of like, I don't know, is like a student-teacher relationship okay? That sort of thing. First up, we have What He Doesn't Know by Candy Steiner. This, I would say, is the most controversial recommendation I'm putting on this list because I know a lot of people have very strong feelings about love triangles and cheating, both of which are present in this book. This book is about our main character, Charlie, who is in a really tough spot in her marriage. Her husband is kind of checked out, and when an old friend slash former flame, Reese, comes to town, she is having to fight her feelings for him and also kind of like not knowing why she's fighting her feelings for him because she thinks her marriage has failed. So this is a really complicated and interesting pick in my humble opinion because it gets you to ask the question like, when is a marriage over? And you question who you should be rooting for the entire time, which I personally really liked. I think if you're someone who likes the twists and you like the messiness of Colleen Hoover books, you might really enjoy this one. My other complex morality recommendation is one that I think is, again, more of a one-to-one comparison to Colleen Hoover books. We have A Different Blue by Amy Harmon, which is a student-teacher relationship kind of similar to Slammed because it's a student-teacher relationship, but like it's not really at the same time. This one follows our main character, Blue, who we find out at the beginning of the story is kind of like abandoned by all of the people in her life, and the story is really about her kind of figuring out who she is, recovering from trauma, and becoming a parent. That is something that is like very much at play in this book, all while being guided by a friend that she meets in high school. And this friend is her teacher, but she doesn't end up like getting romantically involved with this person until well after she's graduated. So if that's something that is worrisome to you, that's not really included in the book, but like there is, I guess, technically a student teacher aspect to it. I loved the story because I think, again, it was a very good exploration of themes, I think, that Colleen Hoover was maybe trying to put in Slammed. I don't want to like put words in her mouth. I'm not entirely sure what her goal was when she published Slammed, but I think it is to get you to question like, is a student teacher thing okay? Yeah, I think Amy Harmon is a great author if you are someone who really likes the emotional aspect of Colleen Hoover's books, you like the poetry and like those sorts of inclusions. Definitely would recommend this one if you like the complex morality and you like, again, the like more emotional undertones of Colleen's stories. And then the last category I have is thrillers with romance, because Colleen Hoover has been doing that more and more lately with Verity and with Layla. And I think you could question or argue whether her thrillers are like truly romantic, but there are like romantic threads in almost all of them. So anyway, I have 3 different recommendations, all very different, all I think go in different directions. I'm going to try my best to kind of describe what sorts of Colleen Hoover readers should read which books, but except we have The Risk by S.T. Abbey. Everybody knows about this book at this point, so it feels a little bit silly to be giving it as a recommendation, but I think if you like Colleen Hoover, I think you would like The Risk, because it is romantic and it does have a thriller vibe. I cannot remember the name of the main character, but essentially this book is about a woman who has been wronged in her life, and she is now a serial killer. She is going out to find the people who harmed her and kill them off one by one. That becomes tricky when she ends up falling for an FBI agent who happens to be on her case. This series as a whole is, I believe, like her trying to reconcile these two things. I've only read the first book, but I really, really enjoyed it, and it really did give me Colleen Hoover vibes to an extent. The romance in this one, it definitely had that sort of like magnetic insta-love sort of vibe, but you can't help but care for the two of them being together, and you're also just so sucked into the mystery thriller aspect, so I think this is like a pretty solid recommendation. The writing is not really similar, but I think the vibes are definitely similar. If you want a story that is more a mystery, but also is deeply romantic, I can't help but recommend The Last Thing He Told Me by Laura Dave. This book is definitely a slower moving story. It definitely doesn't give me Colleen Hoover vibes in the way that it's written. If you want something that's really fast-paced and propulsive, I don't think this is the right pick for you. But if you want something that feels a little like quiet and sleepy, let's say you have like a really long road trip coming up and you want an audiobook to pick up, I'd recommend this book. That's how I consumed the book the first time I read it, or the only time that I've read it really. The story follows our main character, who at the beginning of the story has been with this man for quite a few years. She is, I think, engaged to him, not quite married yet. He has a daughter who the main character in our book is like not particularly close with. She has like kind of a, not combative relationship, but an up and down relationship with her future fiance's daughter. Things get really tricky one day when the husband or future husband disappears, and there is a very like obvious reason as to like why we think he disappeared, but there's so much more than meets the eye. Emotional and familial like relationships are definitely like baked into the story. You really get to see the way that our heroine comes to really care for her husband's daughter. You also get to see the choices that the, I guess, hero of the story, or like the love interest of the story, had to make in certain circumstances. Kind of romantic in a certain sense. I don't want to spoil the book, but I really think this is an underrated mystery book. It's definitely not a thriller, but it's definitely an underrated mystery that I do think some enjoyers of Colleen Hoover might enjoy. It's like if you like a mystery that has like a deeper romantic meaning, you might like that. And then lastly, this is like sort of an unhinged recommendation, but I do think that like, again, some of the Colleen Hoover enjoyers who enjoy the messier parts of Colleen Hoover's books might enjoy The Unrequited by Saffron A. Kent. This is a student teacher / stalking sort of relationship. You have Layla, who is a student of Thomas, and he is kind of like a stuck-up, stoic kind of guy, and Layla makes it her mission to go after Thomas because she is in love, damn it. I just think that if you like, honestly, if you like Taryn Fisher, who is like best friends with Colleen Hoover, I think you would really like this book. I wouldn't say that like Taryn Fisher and Colleen Hoover have like the same writing style, but they do tend to like some of the same things in their stories. Like I just feel like if you like one, you'll probably like the other. And since Taryn Fisher reminds me of this book, I don't know, it's like one step removed from a Colleen Hoover, but also I think like if you like Colleen Hoover, you'd like this. I'm not doing a great job at recommending this book, but I think if you want something that feels a little bit like Lana Del Rey, scandalous, I don't know, I think you would like this one. I think you should pick it up. But that is it. Those are all of my recommendations for books to pick up if you like Colleen Hoover, or if you maybe don't like Colleen Hoover but you're just looking for new romance recommendations or just book recommendations in general, because there were some thrillers on this list. Let me know in the comments down below if you have given any of these books a try and if you've enjoyed any of them, and or let me know other books that you think would be good recommendations for someone who does like Colleen Hoover. I'm hoping that this video will serve as like just an ongoing recommendations thing, that new readers of Colleen Hoover Hoover can, you know, click on this video 2 to 10 years from now and like find some good new things to read. So again, in the comments, let me know, like, what would you recommend to Colleen Hoover lovers? Thanks so much for watching this video. I love y'all so much, and until next time.